Welcome to This Week in Health IT, where we discuss the news, information, and emerging thought with leaders from across the healthcare industry. This is episode 51. This is a special end of the year episode, actually the first of 4 episodes that captures the best of the first 50 episodes from 2018. A little reflection on the past year and what our awesome guests have shared with us. More on that in a minute. This podcast is brought to you by Health Lyrics. Be a market leader. We help you to clarify your health IT plan, eliminate confusion, align your work, experience breakthroughs. Visit healthlyrics.com to schedule your free consultation. My name is Bill Russell, recovering healthcare CIO, writer, and advisor with the previously mentioned Health Lyrics. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I have 4 end of the year episodes for you. The CIOs, the clinicians, the innovators, and the top 10 episode. We're going to end with the top 10 episode. What an amazing group of guests we've had this year. It is so hard to narrow down the content for the end of year shows. My production staff and I have been working on this for several months. I really do hope you enjoy it. Couple quick things. Couple things about the show that you may or may not know. We don't make money. We're not trying to make money. In fact, quite the opposite. We do have a sponsor. However, the sponsor is my company, Health Lyrics. I own the company, which means I sponsor my own podcast. We have 2 young and talented people working on our production team. I really could not keep up without them. Most of the videos you see on the social media are produced by Justin Russell, and most of the website work on both the Health Lyrics site and This Week in Health IT are curated by Holly Russell. We started the show and continue the show for the next generation of health IT leaders. I have a network of some of the smartest people in healthcare and really outside of healthcare as well, for that matter. I get to have fantastic conversations with them about so many relevant topics. I know that most IT staff will not get the opportunity to interact with these leaders, and I wanted them to benefit from their experience and expertise as I have. So here's what we do. We just get on a Zoom call and we record our conversation. To guide the conversation, we've come up with 3 different formats. Our standard show is a news and questions kind of, we cover some news stories, and I ask them a series of questions. Our deep dive episode is another of the forms. This is where we go deep on a specific topic. And finally, we just introduced a new show last week, which we were calling our case study episode. A case study is where we create a fictional health system and we present our guest with similar problems to the ones that our listeners face and ask them how they would solve those challenges. Dale Sanders was kind enough to come on our first case study episode, and we had a blast. It went a little long, probably over an hour is probably a little long for what we're trying to do here, but it was such great content. And the genesis for that was, we did an M&A kind of case study with Sue Shade. We did a first 30 days of being a CIO case study with Ed Marks. And that just, we got such great feedback. We decided, hey, we're just going to have an episode format called the case study. So I hope you enjoyed that. Love to get some more of your feedback on it so that we can fine tune what we're doing. Okay, just a little background on the podcast. The first episode aired in January of 2018. And it was downloaded 28 times during the first week. That's right, 28 times. And I think half of those were from my family members and my really close friends trying to figure out what the heck I was doing. I recorded the first episode on my iPhone using the Voice Memos app. It was highly technical and, high tech. It was just essentially me talking about the show and the JP Morgan conference, which I had just finished attending. That episode has since been downloaded over 200 times. The show now gets between about 700 to 1,500 downloads per week for the audio. And many of you tell me that you haven't even visited the podcast, that you just wait for the video clips to show up on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and that's how you've been picking up on the content. And those get thousands of hits every week. And so my goals for this year were pretty modest, to prove that there was value by getting about 500 consistent listeners every week. We've exceeded that goal. Another goal was not to miss a week of production. This was a little bit harder. 52 straight weeks of the show. And we produced the show through vacations, through my kids moving, through my day job, not the least of which. We've had guests cancel at the last minute and other wonderful challenges to overcome. I had to do one show without a guest, and when my guest actually canceled on that Friday morning, and as you know, we put the show out on Friday, and the guest canceled on Friday morning, which is understandable given the caliber of guests that we have on the show. Sometimes they're called into board meetings and those kinds of things. And so I went it alone. I talked about 4 different news stories on my own. Not my favorite way to do it, but the show must go on, as they say. So 52 straight weeks of production was a goal, and we've exceeded that. So actually, we're close to exceeding that. We have to do one more show, and these end of the year episodes will take us through that. So I want you to know that your feedback has been extremely valuable to shape the content and provide encouragement to continue the work. If you want to communicate, just to let you know, if you want to communicate with me or the show, you can always email us at bill@thisweekinhealthit. It's just the easiest way. It's not a huge staff, as you understand, and I will read each one of those emails. Okay, enough reflection on the show. Today, we're going to start with the Innovators. So this is the Innovators show. You remember, we're going to do Innovators, clinicians, CIOs, and then we're going to do the top 10 episode, and that will be the last episode we do for the year. Now, innovators. All of our guests really are innovators. There's no doubt about that. But these are the people that have either started their own company or are instrumental in developing solutions for healthcare that are new or based on some new technology that is presenting itself. So here we go. The first one, Charles Boise is the Chief Innovation Officer for ClearSense, an AI and machine learning company. Charles has a clinical background, and he is a data genius. My interactions with Charles, the one thing that strikes me about him is I can't believe he is as humble as he is, given all that he has accomplished and how smart he is. So the first 2 clips are really about gaining AI adoption in healthcare, AI being artificial intelligence, and how to introduce AI to your clinicians. So here goes. The first one is about using AI as a cognitive trigger and not a club. And the second one is on how we gain adoption within healthcare.
So back in the late 80s or early 90s at LA County USC, I'm also a trauma nurse and whatnot. We did a lot of predictive models and so forth. I worked with a Dr. William Shoemaker, who started the Society of Critical Care Medicine. We actually built predictive models that for patients in trauma that would predict, depending on the therapy, what the outcome would be. We made a really big mistake back then. We called it prescriptive analytics. The clinicians went nuts. They didn't want a machine telling them what to do. And this is really what this article is all about. And this is almost, oh my gosh, this is almost 30 years later, right? So
Yeah.
Again, with AI, we can build out, beautiful models that I would like to say can assist. I like to call it intelligent assist, to be honest with you. I don't like the idea of using this technology to tell somebody what to do. I'd rather produce a cognitive trigger. This is what is described in the article. If I can give you a heads up that something's going on that you may not have been aware of, that's fantastic. Then you can make a clinical decision and move forward.
And now gaining artificial intelligence adoption with the clinicians.
How do you get that adoption? And really, this article really points out that there needs to be an adoption. And the way you do it is you don't black box any of this stuff. Many folks out there have, their models, their proprietary models, and this, that, and the other thing. You've got to show how you got to, where you got, what data elements you used, what weights you attributed to them. What was a neural network that was employed? Was it random forest? What did you go through all the way through the process to get to the point that you're at now? And how accurate is it? Do you have an ROC curve to show? The various matrices and so forth. What's the precision? What's the recall? You have to be able to demonstrate that, and you have to be able to demonstrate it with their data. And you really can't make statements like, this model will work everywhere, because they won't. They're very geo-specific. What works in Southern California isn't going to work as well in Sarasota, Florida. It's going to need some tweaking because of the demographic nature and even some of the external factors. So
it's interesting to watch these old clips to see how our production has changed. We just cut things off right at the end. Yeah, great insights from Charles Boise. Okay, we're going to continue, and the next couple of videos I'm going to share with you is interesting from this perspective. It's from Dr. John Halamka, CIO for Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, and so many other titles that go along with John. And most of our listeners know John. He is a frequent speaker, guest, blogger. He is out in the community and really a leader. And one of the interesting characteristics of John is he shows up in all 4 episodes. So he will show up in the Innovators episode, the Clinicians episode, the CIOs episode, as well as one of his clips got into the top 10. So we're going to share that. If you're wondering, none of these clips that you're going to hear today are in the top 10. And I pulled out the top 10 clips to stand alone on their own. John came on the show twice with us this year. It was phenomenal to have him, and we really appreciate his time. He in the first clip here, he's going to share his work with the Gates Foundation, which I find just fascinating. What they're able to do with technology in Africa on your standard flip phones. Using blockchain, moving the technology around. So I'll let him explain that a little to you. And then the second is a really just wildly innovative solution. When John and I got into a back and forth on cloud computing and how it can be applied to healthcare, he gave me an example of how using Amazon and essentially a credit card, they were able to gain a significant amount of efficiency in their OR. So here are the next 2 clips on the show. John Halamka.
Last time you were on, we talked. You shared about the Gates Foundation, the work you're doing in Africa. Can you give us an update on what's going on there?
Sure. So the challenge in South Africa: 65 million people, 16% of the population is HIV positive, and the challenge of coordinating care across what is a very heterogeneous country, right? There's urban, there's rural. There are issues with infrastructure. Network bandwidth is expensive and slow. And identity management, who are you, is actually a challenging question because names are misspelled, workers move around. So with the Gates Foundation, we took the process of care delivery and broke it down into several what I'll call APIs or core functions. So core function 1, who are you? So we'll do identity management, and we'll do it based on biometrics. Because name, gender, date of birth match doesn't work so well. Issue somebody identity cards, hard to know. But biometrics, if I say I'm going to take fingerprints, eye scan, retinal or iris, palm vein geometry, or whatever is the biometric of the future, but build a system by which I can link your data by biometrics, that's an interesting infrastructure. So sort of API number 1 is a general biometric infrastructure. And we've deployed that in the right to care clinics and now can tag your HIV laboratory data to you. So you just walk into a right to care clinic and it says, here are the last 5 viral loads that you've had showing your medication is working very well or not. That's sort of problem 1. Problem 2 is, how do I share the data with a patient? Right? As we'll talk about, I'm sure, there's this increasing trend in the US of patients getting access to their own data, their notes, etc. Well, hey, Bill, do you have an iPhone 10? Well, imagine that in South Africa, my lowest common denominator is the Nokia flip phone you had in 1997. Running on a GSM network, maybe. And so we've had to create a medical wallet for the patients that runs on a feature phone over very low bandwidth. And that's something we've deployed. We did a lot of usability testing, and keeping a good number of folks in South Africa on the team really helped us what the needs assessment was. And then the final question is, how do I deal with population health and data aggregation and look at variations in care quality and understand trends? So what we're working on currently is how do you expand what our early work on biometrics and this medical wallet to something that's going to help for countrywide population health analytics. And that, of course, could be machine learning, and it could start in South Africa and scale to other countries. So what's the platform? So we're starting to think.
The great thing about the cloud is that you literally could fire it up this afternoon with a credit card.
And you're totally right. So when I talk about the machine learning applications we've deployed, they're literally like written in a weekend. And so here's another example. I built an API into our OR scheduling system, and I now have access to millions of previous OR cases, doctors and patients. I don't use the names, that's not important, but the patients say, what is the procedure or what is the comorbidity? So what if you say, hey, Amazon, Bill needs an appendectomy. How much time should we allocate? Well, oh, Bill is a 53-year-old person with no comorbidities, and the surgeon is Dr. Famous, who's done 1 million appendectomies. The answer is 25 minutes. So we just did that. And what did it do? It freed up 30% of our OR schedule.
30%. That is just amazing. Okay, I'll be honest with you guys. There are times where I send out invites to people that I didn't really have a relationship with prior to doing this show. And one of those people was Daniel Kraft. Now, I had met Daniel before, and we had some mutual friends. I met Daniel at the Exponential Medicine Conference down in San Diego, which is a phenomenal conference. If you get the opportunity to go, you should do that. And we had some mutual friends, and I put out the invitation for Daniel to come on the show, and he agreed. And I was really excited. Let me see. His title is Physician Scientist and Chair of Medicine at Singularity University in Exponential Medicine. He is a fascinating individual, a physician who just is on the cutting edge, talking to all sorts of people around the world on what they are doing in the area of exponentials. So the first clip here is to explain what exponentials are, and I'll let him do that. And then the second is I thought, an interesting conversation I had with him on augmented reality, just one of the many exponential technologies that he is following, that he talked about on the episode when he came on. So here's Daniel Kraft talking about exponentials and augmented reality, of how exponentials are going to address some of the biggest challenges we have in healthcare. We have, cost, access, fragmented care, care variation, even within our communities in the U.S., but care variation around the world. How does exponential start to change that paradigm?
I think in a sense, there's lots of challenges, and healthcare is kind of like politics. It's a bit local. So, so many different healthcare systems, as you know, might have different challenges and needs, some which are overlapping. I think where it provides the biggest opportunity is to move from, again, somewhat buzzwordy. We want personalized and precision medicine, but in reality today, we're still practicing kind of one size fits all medicine, often the same dose of statin we start with. If you're managing a patient with hypertension or diabetes, we're starting with the same drugs, trial and error, broken feedback loops, still communicated by fax machine in many cases. And so the opportunity is now to take the increasingly exponentially more available, accessible data, whether it's our digital exhaust that can be picked up by our wearables or our smartphones or our connected mattresses, and start to connect that into our healthcare system. And as you discussed in prior shows, kind of meld that information so we understand what it means. What does it mean if my Fitbit or my mattress sensor tells me that my resting heart rate's normally 55, but it's the last couple of months it's creeped up to 75. Something might be happening. How do we take that baseline of data like Verily is doing with the baseline trial, or now the All of Us trial at NIH, and start to understand what are some of these new biomarkers, digital omics, social metrics start to mean, and be then much more proactive and start to shift our sick care system to more of a healthcare one, where we can utilize this sometimes overwhelming amount of data and turn it into proactive, useful information that fits into the workflow of the core of a work clinician. There's some great solutions already here today, but they're not being utilized for reimbursement issues or someone moving someone's cheese, turf battles. There's a lot of other elements beyond the technology itself, the incentives, the user interfaces that need to be put together as well.
And now augmented reality, augmented virtual reality. We're seeing just some really neat use cases at Cedars-Sinai. I know they're using it in other health systems. Are really using it to sort of almost reprogram the brain, as just you talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'm sitting right across the room from me. I already have my antique Oculus device from Facebook, and I barely ever used that one. It's connected to, it was $600 originally. I think it's now $200, but I had to get the $2,000 fast computer. And then just 2 months ago, I got the Oculus Go. It's the same basic form factor, but now I can take it on an airplane. It's really fun to give demos and put people on their first roller coaster ride. But work that's been done at Cedars-Sinai, led by Brandon Spiegel and others, is really catalyzing use of VR and AR and XR, extended reality, across so many different areas. People Google up, I gave the keynote at the the virtual medicine conference that was held at Cedars-Sinai last spring. And some great examples of now taking these often gaming platforms, initially catalyzed by the gaming world and the reality engines in there, to now enable you to create an environment for someone in pain, for example, to be in a cold environment, throw snowballs at penguins, and that has been shown to reduce the need for opiates for acute and chronic pain patients. There's obviously the use of VR and AR now in surgical training. Some very exciting startups from also VR, for example, can take an orthopedic surgeon, put them in the virtual operating room, give them the actual kit from Stryker or another orthopedic company, let them practice with essentially the actual instruments on the patient or the fracture type that they're about to do a procedure on. So I was trained in the C1, D1, Teach One world. It's going to be a future of C1, Sim1, Sim1, Sim1 until you get it right, and often simulate that exactly on the anatomy of the patient you're about to operate on. Yep. And then there's obviously augmented reality, which can be used in a variety of ways of several interesting companies and academic groups, blending that so the surgeon can see through the body, or blend that with robotic surgery, all the way to patients to improve their gamification of recovery from physical therapy and make it much more empowering. And so I think that's a great example of a field that 5 years ago you couldn't have bought an Oculus type thing for $5 million. Now it's essentially $200 available on Amazon.com, and these systems are being democratized where folks around the world, you don't need to be in an academic center, or you can be in Timbuktu and be programming for these and selling them online, and even doing virtual trials that could accelerate the use of VR and AR and XR in a variety of ways.
Exciting stuff. Okay. Sometimes I have people on the show that I have interacted with, many times, and I just enjoy their company. Actually, a lot of people fall into that category. Ann Weiler is one of those people. She is let's make sure I get her. She's the CEO and co-founder for Wellpepper. In fact, if you haven't heard her story, it's really kind of compelling how she started at Microsoft through an incident that her mom had, and really trying to coordinate her care plan, and got motivated to solve that problem, started Wellpepper, and it's really going well. They have a lot of really great announcements this year, some work with Mayo, and some new client work, and just really enjoyed my conversation with her. A couple of things I'm going to highlight here. One is she sort of encapsulated what some of the big tech companies were doing in the space this year. So we talked about Google, Amazon, other things, topics that continue to come up on the show because it's so prevalent in the news. And I thought she encapsulated a lot of that really well. And then the other thing I asked her was around the second clip. I asked her about what makes a good healthcare partner. I know a lot of these innovators and tech startups struggle to really be successful within the healthcare environment. The cultures are so dramatically different, and sometimes plugging them in together is really hard. So I wanted to hear from the innovators what really makes a great partner for them, and makes their projects go well and gets their technology implemented well within the health system. So here's Ann Weiler sharing two things. One, what the big tech companies are doing, and second, what makes a great healthcare partner. The age-old problem. I'm going to throw out a bonus question here just because I'm curious your thoughts. Big tech players coming in, doing things. Amazon, obviously, they have not only their acquisitions, but the JPM Berkshire thing. You have Microsoft re-engaging in healthcare a couple of years ago, and still moving. Google, whatnot. Of the big tech health moves that are going on, who's going to have the biggest impact?
I don't know who's going to have the biggest impact. Google's taking a lot of bets. They've got DeepMind, they've got Verily, they've got Onduo, probably a whole lot of other things I'm not thinking about, the baseline study. So if even one of those pays off, it'll have a big impact. I think everyone wants Amazon to have a big impact so that we all get better customer service in healthcare. But I'm thinking back to the beginning, I don't know that I would rule out China. I think we don't know, at least I don't, I'm not paying a lot of attention, but they can do things with a lot less regulatory, and they're very incented because of the population and the fact that the government is, needing to provide care for this population. So I think, It's exciting. I love seeing big tech and consumer-focused organizations taking a swing at this.
I agree.
But I don't know who's going to win. I think hopefully we'll all
Second
win.
question. So what makes a great health system partner for a digital health startup?
Well, you actually just said it. It's that understanding the bigger picture vision and knowing where to plug things in. Because we're not coming in saying we have to be the only system. And in fact, we're not the system of record, but we have a very important part to play in helping patients. So wherever we come in and they see the vision of where they need to get to, even if it's not to get there today, and they can see that, today we may deploy like this specifically for these scenarios, but in the future we're going to be part of a larger ecosystem, a larger overall digital patient experience. That's a great partner. So anyone who comes in and says, yeah, we're going this way, it's inevitable that we're going to do all of our patient interactions digitally, not all of them, but like that there will be a consistent patient digital experience.
Right.
Those are the easiest ones to work with, because they can also look at us and know that they're not going to get backed into a corner, because we have an API, we have microservices. You can deploy us white labeled, you can deploy us part of a larger system. And budget's always really helpful.
Yeah. People with a budget and a problem to solve tend to be, and a sense of urgency tend to be great partners. Okay, if you're in healthcare long enough, you're going to run into some phenomenal people. And one of my favorite people, and I know I'm going to say this about a bunch of these guests, but one of my favorite people is Anish Chopra, who is the president for Care Journey. He actually worked in the Obama White House and has been instrumental in a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes in healthcare. He's an influencer within the industry, does a lot of speaking, especially on the area of data interoperability, and so he came on the episode, one of the early episodes, and we talked about a handful of things, and he's so articulate that he is going to get 3 clips on this show. The first is around health interoperability and what we're doing in that area. The second was this whole concept of the rise of the digital experience officer. So there's just new roles that keep popping up as healthcare starts to realize that IT and digital are completely different, not completely different, but different, served by the same technologies, but just different focuses and different outcomes. And so Anish and I talk about the rise of the digital experience officer. And then finally, we talk about something that we're all looking forward to, which is applying internet economics to healthcare and healthcare innovation. And we believe that things like FHIR and advances in interoperability and APIs and the work that Apple's doing and the work that Amazon's doing and Microsoft and others is really going to lead to this internet economy, this digital economy really exploding on top of healthcare. And we're looking forward to that. And so here are these 3 clips from Anish: interoperability, rise of the digital experience officer, and internet economics on top of healthcare. Seema Verma came to HIMSS. She did My Healthy Data initiative. She did the Blue Button 2.0 initiative. Do you want to give us a little background on the 2 of those and where you think they're going to go?
Well, let me begin by saying the announcement that she made couldn't have been more bipartisan, or maybe we would call it nonpartisan. If you removed the voice of Seema or the voice of Jared and simply read that presentation without knowledge or context as to who might have delivered it, you could have imagined anyone from the Obama administration carrying that message forward. So this is really building on progress and really pushing it further and faster in the direction that it desperately needs to go. So that's why you saw me applaud a great deal of the work that was done. The big message, I would say, is that the healthcare delivery interoperability strategy that I mentioned before, the B2B model, was built on the foundation of HIPAA authorizations, where you may share, you're allowed to share, but it doesn't compel you to share. So you could put a request in as a physician: hey, I've got this patient, could you send me the records? And if they chose not to respond, then you wouldn't get the data, but they were legally allowed to respond. And so we had this framework of you might be able to share, but you didn't have to. What SEMA is saying is that the other half of HIPAA, the individual right of access, it doesn't mean you own your medical record, Bill. It means you're entitled to an electronic copy and in a readily producible format. These are words that are going to come into play in the API discussion. So SEMA basically said, I'm going to pivot and embrace information exchange tied to that consumer's right. And that, I think, is the kind of sea change that naturally is a progression of where we learned as we went. And that's the model, I think, that's going to carry lowest cost, highest data liquidity, because it's a legal right to request a copy in a readily producible form. And
well, let's talk about, so this show, originally did this show for CIOs to share with their staff so they could stay current. Let's get into a little bit more of the technical aspects. So you have TEFCA, you have FHIR. What does a CIO tell his organization, or what does what does the frontline staff do with TEFCA and FHIR, and where should they start, and where are we at?
So this is a conundrum, which is you can either be a supply sider, which is your job is to envision the infrastructure that you're responsible for, modernize it, and prepare for the future. The other is a listener and responsiveness to the clinical leadership. I'm generally on the side of listen first, which is to say there's a signal out there that you're hearing from frontline clinicians, from physicians that are involved in these new value-based models, and they're complaining about something, about the difficulty to do their job. And of course, there's general complaint, but then there's more specific complaint. I would like to know this at this time in this way so I can make a decision without weakening my productivity. So my sense is that if you start to listen, if you're the CIO and you start listening to the customer's needs in a manner that perhaps we don't quite do today, because we make a single decision. I've got to make a big EHR decision and I got to maintain it, uptime, security, that's its own job. Now I'm listening and saying, well, wait a minute. I'm no longer deciding what EHR to buy. Now I'm thinking what application might ride on top of the EHR that might delight my individual care teams or clinicians and patients to have a better experience. So think of it like a digital experience officer. That role, that listening function, I think is the missing link today, because what their job is to figure out what it is that people need or want, and then map it back to what are the underlying data assets that we have available. And if you kind of do your job right, you serve up the data in a format that allows a random app developer on the street who can do the day-to-day app development for that doctor and not crash your secure systems or require you to allocate limited resources. Are
we finally at a point where I mean, that's an interesting distinction. I don't own my medical record, but I have access to it electronically. Does that create a new ecosystem where the Apples and the Googles and Amazons and the others of the world can now say, hey, the patient is the center of the medical record, not necessarily the health system. So now we can create, we talked about these ecosystems that I think will arise, where the cloud providers will say, hey, if you as a patient want to give us your data, we can now add value to it, or we can now add other data to it and make it, enhance it, and make it better. Are we at a point where the patient is finally the locus of this, the medical record, or we're not there yet?
We are closer, but what's missing right now, Bill, is that delightful application that helps my mom and my dad on Medicare make the best use of that information. So we've got the plumbing technical standards right. We've got a legal and regulatory framework that encourages it. We've got the cloud providers and others helping to facilitate adoption and use. But that last step, who's going to help read my mom's Medicare Blue Button file and remind her when she should get care, or where, if she needs care, she can choose the right provider that meets the needs that she has to have addressed. And my personal opinion, Bill, is that this is going to look a lot like the transition from pension plans to 401ks, where we used to have these employer fiduciaries that would take our money and make big judgments, even if we might have wanted to do something else, or someone else could have given us advice to have a better and more reliable retirement. The move to 401ks gave rise to companies that didn't exist, or if they did, they were modest, Vanguard and Fidelity and others. So I think there's going to be a new rise of what we'll call a health information fiduciary, who will work on the cloud platforms to do the plumbing of getting the data, but it's going to be their last mile application that will help make sense of that information so I can shop smarter for supplemental plans, so I can navigate the delivery system more effectively, and I can access and use the preventive services to keep me healthier, and a whole range of other things that we'll see happen.
Anish Chopra, always leaving you energized and informed. My most recent guest is Dale Sanders. Dale Sanders is the, I think, president of technology. Let me look it up just to be correct here. President of Technology for Health Catalyst. And Dale is a new friend. In fact, he's one of those people that I ask people, who should I have on the show? And the most common answer to that question was Dale Sanders. So I reached out to Dale, and he offered to come on the show, and he has since been on twice this year. And I love Dale because he is so technically adept. He has such empathy for the clinicians, and he has done such great work in the data space. And his experience is phenomenal. He's been a CIO, so he has a lot of different perspectives he brings to the table. He is so easy to talk to, and again, very humble for the amount of experience and knowledge that he has. In fact, all of my guests I could say the same thing for. And in this clip, Dale and I talk about a modern platform for healthcare. We're really geeking out at this point, but I think it's a really good idea of what healthcare could do if the EHR was this modern health platform, what it could do. But I think we both believe that it's going to be outside of the EHR. And so here's Dale talking about what kinds of things would we look for in a modern EHR that would define a technology platform that you think would work?
Well, I would say let's give the attributes of the platform, and then you can spin off whatever you want to, including an EHR from the platform, right? Once you have the data, then you've got the platform. There's like unlimited use cases with it, literally, right? And so you have to have sort of the abstract layer and the reusable content and logic, the curated data that's facilitated with APIs. That's fundamental in healthcare, so that the application doesn't have to constantly do that. So registries, core things like registries, metrics, value sets, embedded machine learning, so that it's not something that you do as an afterthought, but you can call an API and you can bind your data to a machine learning AI model without doing it externally to the application. It's a natural part of the data first application. It certainly has to support real time. It has to support batch analytics, right? Yep. It has to be microservices based. And there's a lot of debate about what does microservices really mean. We can talk about that, but what it means is continuous delivery, right? No more of remember back to the days when you had to upgrade an EHR? Yep. It was a thousands of hours initiative that took months and months to plan and execute, and even then it was painful, right? As opposed to the microservices continuous release cycle that we see now. So let me comment on that, by the way. So the data operating system we have right now is microservices based, and we're able to push out updates to our apps and the platform now faster than the cultural ability of health systems is to adapt to it. Because the culture, our IT shops are accustomed to very rigorous configuration control and release schedules. At best, it's like once a month, generally speaking. It's certainly not daily. So that's an interesting thing that's evolving. Back to the attributes of the platform. The platform has to support the integration of text, discrete, and image data. You have to be able to support that and make that a natural part of the data ecosystem. I think I mentioned real-time streaming. It has to do that. Batch analytics. By the way, if folks want to study this a little more, it's an easy study. Kappa and Lambda architectures in Silicon Valley are the role model that we should all be following. Those design patterns are what we should all be following.
Okay, so we're coming to the end of our first of 4 end of the year episodes. This is the Innovators episode. The last 2 clips come to us from Charlie Lougheed. So Charlie has done a ton of work with Cleveland Clinic and actually a lot of health systems across the country. He was the co-founder of Exploris, and Exploris, did a lot of really interesting big data work early on, and they sold to IBM a little while later. And since then, he's technically not in healthcare right now, but he's on the periphery. He's co-founder of the Unify Project, and you can look that up online. And Charlie is always looking for what the next thing is in healthcare. He's having conversations, and so I like to tap him for just his ideas on startups and on new technologies. And Charlie gave me one of the most articulate answers on blockchain this year. And I realized that blockchain was overhyped, and so people don't want to talk about it so much. But I think we are going to see over the next 12 to 18 months some solutions. We're going through that trough, and you're going to start to see some solutions actually come out that are based on blockchain. It will be interesting to see how healthcare adopts them. Well, Charlie gave us a really great answer on some of the use cases for blockchain. The second clip here is healthcare startup economics, and Charlie just shares some great. If you're thinking of doing a startup, if you're thinking of or even evaluating startups, he talks about the economics and how people should be approaching it and how they should be thinking about the value that they add to healthcare. So here are these two: blockchain and healthcare startup economics. So that's a great setup. So so the nature of blockchain is distributed, immutable record, smart contracts. So I'm going to give you 5 healthcare use cases, and let's just go through likelihood of happening and impact on healthcare. So here are the 5 use cases. Provider licensing and credentialing. Do you think blockchain has application there? And then what would the impact be?
I think it has incredible potential there, and it would have a big impact. The process of credentialing is slow, it's cumbersome, it's redundant, it's expensive. If you're going to get to a gig economy in healthcare, it's absolutely critical.
Blockchain-based, HIE-based, between anyone, payers, providers, whatever, but blockchain-based HIE, what do you think?
It could be the next generation of HIE. I mean, HIE technology has struggled, right, for a lot of business reasons, but some technical reasons. So I think it's got a pretty good chance there. Not as high as credentialing, but a decent chance.
Medication supply chain. A lot of talk about that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the question is as to what degree the consumers really care. I've heard a lot about this in the food industry. I think it has applicability. I think it's really more regulation will drive that, though.
Okay, how about revenue cycle, and more specifically fraud prevention and auto adjudication of medical claims processing?
That's another one I think will be a big opportunity. That we all know that process today is fairly broken. It's extremely expensive. It's a big part of the cost of healthcare. So I'm bullish on that as well.
Efficient prior authorizations and referral through smart contracts.
I don't know. We'll see. I think we've got some pretty good systems in place to do that today. Maybe later, but that one doesn't come to the forefront for me.
You've had a successful entrepreneurial venture in health IT. So I really have 2 questions around this. What was the one thing that surprised you as you got into healthcare? And what's the one thing you would tell someone going into this space today?
I think the one thing that surprised me getting into healthcare, not knowing anything about healthcare, was how gracious and helpful the healthcare community was, particularly to me and Steve and others that didn't have experience with it, about getting up to speed. They knew that we had something to offer from data, so you have to bring something to the party. We understood big data, we understood different industries, but it is a good market to be in. A lot of really smart people that like to teach, and if you give them the respect and be patient, they'll do that. They'll coach you. They'll tell you what they need. So that is something I really do love about the market, and still do.
Yeah. So what would you tell somebody who's just starting off their health tech firm and they're going into the space? Maybe something you've learned as they get started on this path.
Yeah, I think understand the economics. That's absolutely critical. You have to follow the money. You have to understand how these models work, because you can have a great idea, great technology, but if it doesn't improve the situation for the provider, for the payer, for the patient, or at least two of those 3, it's going to be a tough sledding.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the Innovators episode. If one of the things I'm going to really encourage people, if you're listening to this podcast, share it with somebody. I believe that this content is really valuable. I believe it's valuable to healthcare IT staff, to digital staff, to strategy staff. I think it's valuable to startups, to consulting firms, anyone who's working in healthcare. I believe this is valuable for. So please share it with somebody, and that way we can get the word out and continue to just have this great content available to build the next generation of health IT leaders. So, the best way to follow the show is the website, thisweekinhealthit.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, thisweekinHIT. And there's a shortcut to the YouTube channel. Actually, if you just go to the website, thisweekinhealthit.com, and click on the YouTube link at the top, it'll take you to the YouTube channel. I think I'm over 400 or 500 videos at this point. Well worth the time, and they're curated. They're there's playlists and some other things. So please check that out. And please come back every Friday for more news, information, and commentary from industry influencers. That's all for now.